Bakersfield, California native Katilla Nash is forced to navigate a very adult world at a tender age. Raised with her older sister, at just 10 years old, she's yanked from her parents' custody by Child Protective Services.
It was a rough environment for her, not a stable, mom and dad type situation.
We don't know why Katilla was removed from her home specifically, but it had to be very serious for the authorities to want to move her and place her into a foster care or a group home.
As a ward of the state, Katilla immediately begins a string of run-ins with the law.
She was quick to resort to violence. It started with things like assaults at school. There was a case where she was arrested for vandalism. She was arrested for hitting a girl on a bus.
Sometimes children who may come from a very dysfunctional home, unless they get the needed psychological care, they will replay a lot of those perhaps violent situations out in their own lives.
By 15 years old, she's had enough of being told where to live. The headstrong teenager runs away from her group home and ends up where she started, at her mother's house.
By this time, mother and father are no longer together, so she's with her mother.
Sometimes that old adage is true, that the devil you know is better than the devil that you don't.
Over the next 3 months, Katilla reconnects with her mom and her older sister, 17-year-old Angelique, who is also living at home. Back together at last, the Nash girls are thick as thieves.
Angelique introduces her to one of her oldest friends, Chandra. Chandra lives with her aunt, and her aunt is pretty relaxed, pretty laid back. The girls like to stay there, they like to hang out.
Just before Valentine's Day, Katilla visits Chandra one evening. And that's where she meets Chandra's cousin, 17-year-old David Moses. David just moved in and is crashing on her couch.
Katilla and David have a connection. The connection is that they have similarities in their background.
Actually, I just moved back here, so I was trying to group home.
Really? A group home? Yeah. Me too.
Really?
Yeah. Back in Santa Barbara.
They both had issues with the law. They'd been in and out of group homes.
As soon as I had the chance, I got out of it.
And just like Katilla, David ran away to be closer to family.
With both of them being on the run from group homes, their new lifestyle was going to have to be really similar. They're both having to stay hidden from the police.
With so much in common, conversation is easy, and the pair makes plans to see each other again soon.
Even though David was a few years older than Katilla, in some ways emotionally they were evenly matched.
Katilla is riding high on the love connection. The casual relationship is developing into a romantic relationship. As winter rolls into spring, the two become inseparable.
David and Katilla had an instant sort of love affair. They only dated for a couple of months, and Angelique also spent a lot of time with them. So they became like the Three Musketeers.
On a warm California afternoon, 2 months into their courtship, David pops by with a proposition.
He said, I have a plan that we can score some weed, some marijuana from a friend of mine.
The girls are game, but none of them have the cash to make the buy. David says, don't worry, he's got that problem all figured out. They just need to find an empty house to rob. And his plan is simple.
Go to the front, knock on the door. If someone comes to the door, float some name that doesn't live there, and then, oh, sorry, wrong house, and leave.
Knock on some doors, if nobody's home. Take some. I don't have
When you finally come across a home where nobody answers the front door, you go around to the back and you break into it.
It sounds easy enough, so Katilla and Angelique agree to come along.
After all, no one was going to be hurt. It was a victimless crime. It was a nice neighborhood, so no one would really miss what was being taken.
The trio sets off on their quest just a few streets down from the apartment complex.
They pick this neighborhood because it's got nice homes in it.
They stroll through the well-manicured block until they find a house that looks empty. David walks up to the porch while the girls wait close by on the driveway. Right away, there's a hitch.
The first neighbor had a dog, and the dog barked.
He hesitates for a moment before deciding that the pooch is making too much of a racket.
Out of nowhere, the door opens. And the lady of the house, being suspicious as she was, asking, "Could I help you, sir?"
When the neighbor opened the door, I think that kind of startled him somewhat.
A speechless David is taken by surprise. Catilla acts fast and steps in for her stunned boyfriend.
She answered up for him and said, "Is Matthew here?"
Puzzled by the bogus question, the woman tells the teenagers that no one named Matthew lives in the house. She shuts the door, and the three nervously exhale before walking a few houses over.
Catilla, being that she came from this kind of dysfunctional, street-smart upbringing, was able to step in and use her wits and get him through this.
They try a couple more homes with no luck. Then, they come across a small house at the center of the block.
He knocked on the front door, and nobody answered.
David decided to go back down and tell them, basically, the coast is clear.
He positions Angelique at the end of the driveway to serve as a lookout. Then David and his girl walk along the side of the house to the back door.
David turns the doorknob. He realized that it's unlocked, and they enter.
Because nobody answered the door, they decided that was the house that they were going to do.
But as they sneak further into the home, they're faced with an obstacle they didn't bargain for.
There is a 81-year-old elderly woman, Dorothy Session, who comes around the corner to startle both of them. Dorothy had been in the bedroom, and she did not hear the door.
David and Dorothy lock eyes, neither knowing what to say.
And they're surprised by the woman in the kitchen. There was not anybody supposed to be at the house.
Again, Catilla jumps in for her man, coming up with an excuse for being in the stranger's house.
They're shocked and they're scared at that point. Catilla basically tried to play it off and said that she needed to use the phone.
The gray-haired lady is dubious, but says okay, and points to the phone on the wall.
It's all shooting from the hip from there. And now she's got to make some kind of a legitimate call.
David keeps an eye on the nervous resident, and Catilla hopes that after the phony call, the two can make a run for it. That's when Dorothy breaks the standoff.
As he's looking at the older lady, he thinks that she may have a necklace that would immediately call the police with just a touch of the button, like the lifeline. And he sees something in her face, like she's going to do it.
As Catilla picked up the phone, she heard the sound of a hit. She turned around and looked and saw that David had punched the woman.
With one swift blow, he knocks her to the ground to keep her from alerting the police. But he doesn't stop there.
He knocked her down, and they continued to hit her.
At one point, she said, "Oh, Lord, help me." And he hit her again.
Catilla watches in horror as the lady writhes in pain on the floor.
Catilla couldn't believe her eyes. David had gone out of control. Catilla thought they would be in and out, collecting some valuables, and hurting someone was not part of the plan.
Catilla got scared and ran out and got Angelique.
Well, that certainly was something that she didn't expect, and this was a side of David she had never seen before. Catilla was hoping against hope that Angelique could step in and now be the one to calm down this storm that was just getting so much bigger than what she could handle.
As she gets closer to the house, Angelique hears Dorothy's screams and knows they need to run. Fast.
Angelique can hear it clear outside in the driveway, so it had to have been loud enough for Angelique to hear it clear on the street. Angelique starts yelling at them to just, "Let's go."
David, let's go.
And at some point, all three left.
They leave the woman in a pool of blood. Empty-handed, they run back to the house of David's cousin, Chandra. And the shell-shocked teenagers are frantic. But they feel like they can trust Chandra, so they tell her what just went down.
David told her that he had to hit a woman while they were breaking into her house.
He was apologizing to Chandra, telling her, "I'm sorry, cuz, I'm sorry." Catilla was crying the entire time.
Catilla and David did have criminal past, but this was something that was beyond the pale for either one of them, and they were starting to feel the guilt as to what had gone down.
As time passes, the tension fades. And soon the three think they might have gotten away with the attack. But just in case, they'll lay low at Chandra's place. The day comes to an end, and the teenager's victim, 81-year-old Dorothy Session, is just where they left her.
Dorothy lives with her son, and she takes him to work in the morning and normally picks him up in the afternoon. When no one arrives to pick her son up, the family gets concerned.
Then at 6 o'clock, Dorothy's family sends her grandson to check on her. When he walks into the house, he's faced with a grisly scene.
Saw the blood spatter, and then as he rounds the corner, he finds her laying there, severely beaten.
The young man moves towards his beloved grandmother as she lays still on the floor.
She had a lot of trauma to her face. There was a lot of blood.
But when he gets a closer look, he realizes the resilient woman is still alive.
Mrs. Sessions was there laying on the ground by herself in incredible pain.
She's moaning. She first tells him, "I hurt." Then she says a black male and a black female did that to her.
Minutes later, ambulances and police roll in, with sirens blaring.
The investigators that came on the scene were able to question Mrs. Session. She was very good in giving them a full description of the black male and black female who entered her residence and assaulted her.
She went to the hospital, which is just down the street.
Her situation is very grave. Her brain is swelling, and that's absolutely not good for a woman her age, and that she's got a lot of broken bones in the face.
Doctors do what they can to try and save the 81-year-old grandmother. But a few hours after the violent attack, Dorothy Session passes away.
You have a completely innocent victim who didn't do anything to place herself in danger. She was just minding her own business, cooking and watching TV.
The next day, the vicious slaying of the matriarch is the #1 lead.
It's beginning to get really blown up over the news. A home invasion robbery where a woman is beat to death is not an everyday thing here.
It was pretty shocking. It kind of captured the whole community in a way that few cases do.
David and the girls decide to split up and hide out from the heat. After borrowing cash from a relative, Katila and her sister move to a motel room, while David shacks up with yet another family member. But none of them seem to be able to keep quiet about what they did.
Perhaps it made them feel a little bit better to relieve a little bit of that guilt that they were already feeling. It really did show how naive they were. They didn't think someone else would say something about it to law enforcement.
Once you tell a bunch of people, they're going to tell a bunch of other people. Sooner or later, it's going to get back to us.
And when the anonymous tip line rings, detectives are all ears.
My partner gets a call that seems pretty credible, giving us the first names and descriptions of our suspects.
The name Katila and the name Angelique are relatively unique names, and I was able to fairly quickly locate both of them in the system.
With that, they hit the ground running, showing neighbors photo arrays with Katila and David's prior mugshots.
The sheriff put out all of their information and distributed wanted posters to the media, letting everyone know that we were looking for them in connection with this case.
And it's not long before police track down the Nash girls.
We got the tip where the two girls were located. They were at a hotel in central Bakersfield.
Police make their way to their location and pinpoint the girls' room.
The deputies were able to basically surround and move in and place them both under arrest.
At the station, Katila tries to distance herself from her boyfriend. She insists that she only wanted to use the phone at Dorothy Sessions' house, and it was David who flew off the handle.
She's crying a lot during the interview. We didn't know David was going to do this. Put a lot of it on David.
The reality at this point was that she was going to save herself, and to hell with David.
The next day, knowing it was just a matter of time before police locate him, David turns himself in. But he has a different story to tell. He says that they were all aware of the plan to rob the home.
Other detectives were interviewing witnesses, and one happened to be David Moses' cousin, Chandra. in which she corroborated the story of them entering the home to burglarize it.
Even though David was the only one to hit Dorothy, the teenagers are all charged as adults with first-degree murder.
If you kill someone or someone's killed while you're committing a burglary, you buy into all of it.
A lot of people feel that the penalty for a crime like this is harsh, especially when there are people that literally did not commit the crime. Somebody has to be responsible regardless.
2 years after the assault, David Moses is convicted of murder and is sentenced to life in prison. Katilla and Angelique Nash are also convicted, and they each receive the lighter sentence of 25 years to life.
Katilla would have to do 25 years before she's eligible for parole. So at the earliest, it would be 40 years old, and that's if she gets parole on her first go-round.
That's all the time in the world to regret ever getting mixed up with David Moses. Teenager Katilla Nash learned that even a simple plan for quick cash can turn deadly. In Muskogee, Oklahoma, Marcus Rowland will meet his soulmate, and the two of them will head down a road to ruin. Deep in the Bible Belt of Muskogee, Oklahoma, Marcus Rowland is surrounded by a loving brood.
Marcus's mother and father never married, and his father left when he was about 5 years old.
Marcus was a loving, caring little boy, very adventurous. My sister had him at 16, so she was a teen mom. We all grew up in the same household.
Even at the age of 13, Marcus has a flamboyant way of expressing himself.
He'll get in our heels, put our wigs on, play in our makeup. My grandma will whip his butt, and he'll still do it anyway.
And soon it's clear that this is more than just dress up.
Marcus was realizing that he was gay, and this was a monumental event in his life.
What we tend to see with children who believe that they may be gay is that because of the society that they're in and that you're supposed to fit gender norms, some of those thoughts can be very, very confusing.
Internally, Marcus struggles with his identity. He fears what he will face once his secret is out.
I'll be right there.
It's a pretty conservative town. I'm sure there's probably a lot of whispers.
The precocious youngster decides that he can't bottle up his feelings any longer. The teenager takes the first step towards living his full self, coming out to his mother.
She was a little upset at first, but she loves her child no matter what.
With his mom's acceptance, he's finally free to live his life the way he's always felt on the inside.
For some young people, coming out may be a roller coaster experience emotionally, because even though they feel that this is something that they must do, quite often the reaction of society really does make them feel like they are less than.
By the time Marcus is a high school senior, his feminine flair is on full display. While still identifying as a male and not a transgender woman, he embraces his ladylike qualities.
Marcus began to grow his hair longer and dress in female clothing full time. It was very difficult for strangers to figure out whether he was a boy or a girl.
We used to shop all the time for makeup, go get our nails done. If I had a handbag, I was done with it. Oh, Annie, let me get that handbag.
And it's not only his looks that he's focused on. The young man has his future in mind.
He had career goals. He wanted to study to be an RN.
Becoming a nurse is a very difficult process, so he was clearly setting his sights high.
While at school, he might feel like he's just one of the girls, but his gender-bending identity is not always accepted.
Marcus was using the ladies' room at his school. The people in Muskogee were very traditional, and they found it very difficult to adjust to a student like Marcus.
He couldn't go in the boys' bathroom because he was just too scared that they'll beat him up in the boys' bathroom.
After multiple warnings, Marcus continues to use the ladies' room.
You are not supposed to be in here. I told you, I'm scared to go in there.
It just caused a big debacle.
Let's go.
It was just going downhill from there.
Rather than be forced to use the boys' bathroom, the teenager doesn't go back to school. Now, he must contemplate his future, and he seeks advice from his cousin.
Without a high school diploma, his dreams of becoming a nurse was shattered. He clearly fell into a funk.
Marcus kind of went off the deep end. He didn't know where he was going to go from there. His hopes had been dashed.
Without a job, he receives government assistance checks to get by. The 18-year-old's heart is heavy, and his family hopes they can cheer him up.
His cousin decided to introduce him to a guy by the name of Caleb Sanders.
Caleb is also gay, and even though he is only 15, he's confident well beyond his years.
He seemed older, and he was not feminine like Marcus.
And the two have a lot in common.
Caleb grew up in Muskogee, and he felt like an outsider as well.
And just like Marcus, his high school career ended abruptly. After getting suspended for fighting a couple of times, the rowdy teen just stopped going.
Marcus could really identify with that. And the fact that they were both gay, now Marcus did not feel alone.
After that meeting, the two of them can't stand to be apart. And soon, they make things official.
They came a couple very quickly. Caleb was the first person he ever brought home.
They spent all of their free time together, and as a result, they developed an us against the world type of relationship.
2 months in, Marcus moves out of his mother's home and into an apartment where he and Caleb will live together.
He was so excited about moving in with Caleb. That's all he talked about. I'm gonna have my own place and my boyfriend's gonna be there.
But the boys rack up the bills faster than Uncle Sam sends cash.
He'll get his SSI on the 1st of the month and he'll be broke by the 3rd of the month. When he called and asked me to borrow money, that was very shocking to me because he had never had to do that before.
Marcus does everything to please his younger boyfriend. But the 3-year age difference often rears its ugly head.
All they did was fight. So I was very worried about that.
Because of a text?
Marcus was accusing Caleb of being very flirtatious, and that caused a lot of strife in the relationship. Marcus would accuse Caleb of cheating on him.
When the fight escalates the way it escalates with those two, it's no stopping either one of them.
You keep on accusing
And Caleb has a very hot temper. He'll just fly out the handle.
All the fighting takes a toll on Marcus, emotionally and physically.
He was thinner. He just didn't seem like the Marcus I know, like the happy, loving Marcus. We told him, we need to get rid of Caleb. He would not listen to us. He's so in love with Caleb.
Their rocky relationship reaches its boiling point on a warm December day when the guys go for a ride through town. In the car, they're in the midst of another epic argument. Marcus is fuming, and he snipes at his man. Fed up, Caleb claps back.
Marcus pulls off to the side of the road, and that's when the fight starts.
A passerby sees them tussling, and they call police. When an officer arrives, Marcus is in no mood to cooperate.
You step on out and see your ID.
Marcus knows his rights and doesn't want to get out of the car.
Step out of the car.
What? I didn't do that.
I'm giving you a lawful order.
I didn't do it.
I'm giving you a lawful order.
The officer becomes a little more stern with him.
Yeah, one more second to step out of the car.
What? I didn't do that.
540, are you close?
I know
Lawful
my
order.
rights.
Step
No.
out of the car.
I know my rights.
Step out of the car.
I know my rights.
Then Marcus revs the engine and takes off.
540, keep driving.
Police follow in hot pursuit.
Back west on Denver.
This chase goes roughly 2 miles through the streets of Muskogee.
Back south there at 21st.
It was dangerous for everybody involved.
After mere minutes, it's all over.
Marcus spins the car out, and the officers get him into custody.
He's arrested and charged with eluding police, but he gets some leniency.
Me and his mother went up and talked to the DA, and we said it wouldn't be safe for him in jail because the way that he is.
And we complied. He had a bond set immediately, and so he wouldn't have to stay all night in jail.
Caleb is also sent home.
We thought Caleb at that time was just a juvenile that should have been in school.
Back at their apartment, the couple reconcile.
Even though they should have been on the outs, Marcus and Caleb made up and were able to connect again. But this was because they had a history of fighting.
They're happy not to be locked up. But Marcus still faces possible prison time for the chase. And he's terrified of what or who he might run into behind bars.
It wouldn't be safe for Marcus in jail because the way that he is.
Rather than suffer with the possible consequences of the chase, the pair decides to hit the road and flee Muskogee, stopping to take a breath 120 miles away in Oklahoma City.
They left town and they went to a hotel in the Oklahoma City area.
They spent several days in a hotel room, and it appeared as though Marcus was falling deeper in love with Caleb.
They romanticized it. This could be part of their romance, part of their adventure to bring them even closer together.
The teenagers revel in their newfound freedom, away from all they've known. For the next 3 weeks, they crisscross the Midwest, covering at least 1,000 miles.
I'm not convinced that they knew really where they were going.
But back at home, when the 18-year-old misses his court date, a warrant is issued for his arrest. And the judge isn't the only one waiting for an appearance from Marcus. His family is worried sick. They haven't seen or heard from him, and they're afraid something terrible has happened.
All his family wanted was for Marcus to come home safe. They tried to reach out to him on his cell phone to try to let him know that they just simply wanted him to come home and be safe.
Eventually, they get him on the line during a break from driving, and what he says sends chills up their spines.
I was like, please just come home, you know. He said, Caleb said we're never coming back to Muskogee, so we're never coming back.
They're not understanding what's really going on because they're in a world of themselves where they're in this fantasy of escape, not just from the law, but from the world.
They were clearly immature in what they were doing. They thought they were invincible. They weren't really sure where they were headed. They were just doing whatever they were doing to survive.
A month after their run-in with the law, the pair drive as far as Waterville, Ohio, nearly 750 miles from Muskogee. But they have a problem. They're out of cash. So the chaotic couple figure it's time to get creative.
So Kayla says, well, I know how to rob the dollar store.
Caleb's mother had some background working for a dollar store.
He was somewhat familiar with some operating procedures and opening and closing times, where they keep the money.
They'll go in with realistic-looking airsoft guns and stick up the store. Caleb insists no one will get hurt.
Marcus wanted nothing more than to make his man happy, so he agreed to join him on the heist.
Both of them are so young, they're making such inappropriate decisions. And more than anything else, they needed the money in order to continue fleeing the police on this adventure of the ages.
The next day, it's go time. According to witnesses, just before closing, the guys walk into the nearly empty dollar store in Waterville, Ohio, with their guns hidden. Then they draw their weapons.
They walked in with their airsoft guns, which looked very real to the employees.
The horrified staffers have nowhere to run. Marcus secures the clerk's hands with duct tape and forces her to kneel on the floor.
Caleb pointed the gun at the manager's head and demanded that he open up the safe.
But the boss has some bad news for the bandits.
That was a time save, so they weren't able to get the money.
The employees were not able to open up the safe with a combination or a key. It had to be a certain time for the combination to work.
Forced to go to Plan B, Caleb walks the manager to the front of the store and demands he open the register.
Just then, a customer came into the store and came upon the scene. She saw the manager of the store looking terrified and saw another man standing behind him. As a result, she runs out and calls 911 immediately.
The clock is now ticking before police arrive on the scene. Panicked, Caleb levels his airsoft gun at his hostage.
Though Marcus and Caleb were using fake guns, the employees didn't know that, and they were scared for their lives.
We've got young kids that have no boundaries at this point.
These guys were not playing. They clearly crossed the line and were serious about what they were doing.
Just as Caleb forces the manager to open the register, a customer walks in.
She could clearly see that there was something wrong going on.
The woman immediately runs out of the store and calls 911. The pair now have just minutes to take the money and run.
They thought this was going to be in and out, but this was clearly different.
I'm sure that they felt that they had no choice but to follow through. Their guns were already drawn, they were in the store, it was going down, and after all, they needed the money to continue to fund their escape.
Desperate to get out of there, but not wanting to leave empty-handed, Caleb threatens to kill the manager if he doesn't empty the register.
What's interesting here psychologically is, even though Marcus and Caleb knew the truth about these fake guns, it was the power that they had over these individuals that was feeding their behavior.
And at any moment, the police will be on the scene.
And if they ever got cornered and they had anything that looked like a weapon, I'm afraid that somebody's gonna die.
The manager gives Caleb all the money that he has. Caleb snatches the money and they run out of the front door.
But before they make it even a few feet, they are greeted by the sight of blue and red police lights. The jig is up. And in just seconds, Caleb and Marcus's month-long run from the law comes to an end.
They got caught on scene. Whatever their plan was, it's over. And nobody got killed. That was my first thought.
They are both charged with aggravated robbery, kidnapping, and felonious assault.
Instead of facing the reality of the situation, they chose to run. If you think about it, they were pretty lucky because these weren't real guns and the situation didn't take a deadly turn.
When kids of this age commit crimes like this, they don't realize the long-term effects that they're having on their lives. It's fun right now, but when you're sitting in a 4x8 cell in 10 years from now, it's not gonna be fun.
After a week in jail, the severity of his actions finally sinks in.
He told me he was relieved that it was over and that he was really sorry for everything he had did. He was very remorseful for his crimes.
Marcus pleads guilty to robbery and 2 counts of kidnapping and is sentenced to 8 years in prison. Because Caleb is still a minor, he admits to aggravated robbery and 2 counts of kidnapping in an Ohio juvenile court. He receives a suspended sentence and is sent back to Oklahoma.
They assumed that Marcus was calling the shots because he was the oldest of them both.
Through it all, Marcus still wishes he could be with the love of his life.
He asked me to find where Caleb was at and to write Caleb and tell Caleb that he loved him and missed him and that he can't wait for them to be together again. And I told him I absolutely was not going to do it.
First loves are hard to forget, and these two had a very strong connection, part of it because they were gay in a very conservative area.
And Marcus will have the 8 years behind bars to cure himself of his tainted love for Caleb.
I think people tell themselves that they may be doing criminal activity for love, but that's not love.
If somebody loves you, they wouldn't take you through that kind of stuff and tell you to do that. And it's not worth it.